GM, welcome back everyone to another episode of Macro Monday. Well, I guess it's Tuesday today because I had to wait for 24 hours to make sure that there's no more shenanigans in the market before I make this video. So I guess just for this week, we will call it Tuesday. Anyway, let's get down right into the episode. So Bitcoin obviously fell because of the tariff that Trump initiated on April 2nd, basically the Liberation Day. There's actually more tariff coming up on April 9th, and I'm going to get more into that later, but there's been a lot of development between various countries, and China hit the US back with even more tariff. So we're not really sure what does that mean for the market. A lot of the talking heads like Larry Fink has argued that we can potentially see more 20% down if Trump doesn't pivot and continues just to fight his way into enforcing all of these tariffs into the biggest economies and the biggest partners of the United States. Initially, when the tariff happened, I would say around April 2nd, the crypto market was holding a lot better than equities, and a lot of people were thinking what was the reason? But turns out that's not really the case. Just a few days after, when the market has, I guess, truly consumed the seriousness of that tariff, it just fell and has this 6% daily candle here on Sunday. That's the first thing. The craziest thing I would want to showcase is actually this chart. So others, which once again, just to remind everybody, this is basically total crypto market cap, excluding the top 10. So it's excluding USDC, USDT, Solana, ETH, and all of the big Dino coins, have pretty much fallen back down to this level, this support level since early Jan 2024. Pretty much we were in this bear market period in late 2022 to late 2023. We had this rally in Q4 of 2023, and that's along the line of Solana Renaissance, Jito airdrop for those of you who still remember that period. And then we pretty much had two somewhat of an alt season-ish here in Q1 2024 and Q4 2024. Now we are back down here, and it's pretty much breaking support. You can see here that right now it's at 190 billion. And this is crazy because when you think about it, between this time and this time, so between Jan of 2024, so roughly 15 months ago until now, I think stablecoin has grown quite substantially. We can quickly check that on Tether. We can see here that from around Jan 2024 until now, there's around 50 billion of USDT minted. So it means that out of this 190 billion here, this is actually much lower if we exclude the level of, if we exclude the percentage of stablecoin. The percentage of altcoin that makes up 190 billion here is much lower in relative value compared to Q1 of 2024. And then obviously Bitcoin dominance is also on a tear. It printed another weekly high here, and it's pretty much been on an up only for 800, not 54, 800, more like 880 days now if we just shift this by a couple. Yep. So this has pretty much been at a level that we haven't seen since, since early 2021. So it's becoming very clear that Bitcoin is now an asset class on its own. And I think I would dare to say that the 4-year cycle might have already been broken, and we might not ever see something like that again. It might be shorter spurts of mania, whenever there's a new type of narrative or Ponzi-nomics that emerge. But I don't think we will see very clear-cut cyclical 4-year cycles like before, because the market cap of our industry has also grown quite significantly to enable that. Moving on to Coinbase Premium, it's actually not great. Pretty much has been on a fairly significant negative level since the past week, meaning that there isn't really any retail strong buying demand on the Bitcoin side. Moving on to tariffs discussion, I think it's very clear that right now it doesn't really matter what's going on in the smaller vertical of crypto space itself. Every price action is going to be determined by what's happening in the next few months in the Trump's administration. If we are going to see more of this sort of tariff shenanigans getting compounded, or are we actually going to see some pivot that will calm down parts of the market? There are a lot of great takes that people have shared. For example, here, Alex Kruger from Kruger Macro tweeted sort of basically, there's a lot of risk in the market because once the credit markets break, it's very hard to stop the snowball. In 2008, we had 50% drawdown in 1 year. During those time period, there was actually a lot of somewhat relatively positive news that came, but the market still dropped regardless. So it is more about once we see something breaks in the system that might be caused by this tariff, it's going to be very hard to stop them, and we might not know what we don't know. So I've compiled a couple of good reads on tariffs here from Austin Campbell, from Jeff Park, which have laid out the argument as to why tariff is essentially the US way to achieve lower dollar and lower yield, and that is ultimately bullish Bitcoin, and also like Kyla's read on pretty much overall summary of what's been happening. We are still seeing the downstream effect of this tariff even in the on-chain market. We're seeing more and more ETH whales and people on Hyperliquid or on other perp dexes getting liquidated. A lot of people who took out loans by collateralizing their ETH when ETH price was around 1,500 thought perhaps that we would not see that level given the ETFs are now a risk in getting liquidated. So there's a couple articles that have shown here, for instance, the single largest ETH position is roughly 147 million, have a strike price of 1,100. Probably, like jinx, knock on wood, that we're probably not going to see that level, but it's obvious that there's been a lot more like close calls, and the number of total liquidations in the past couple of days has been at a staggering high. Moving on to further negative news impacted by the tariff and the sell-off is MicroStrategy discloses nearly 6 billion loss in Q1 as pretty much sell-off halts their Bitcoin buying spree. So they spent 7.6 billion buying more than 80,000 Bitcoin in Q1, but so far it hasn't purchased any Bitcoin. But it's clear to me that the MicroStrategy's strategy, no pun intended, is obviously working, and a lot of people out there are going to be copying that playbook for other assets, for other majors. So Marco Santori is launching his new project called DeFi Dev Corp, which is basically it's a public crypto company. Think of it like MicroStrategy, but for everything else. And they're starting with Solana. So their stock jumped 800% because of this news, pretty much an easy 8x. So to me, it's very clear that there is a lot of demand for this sort of like crypto assets wrapper in the equities market. It's also a bit of a growth hack because especially, again, it's probably a bit too much to cover in this video, but if the accounting rule gets changed and they can actually report the capital gains as revenue or as profits, then it will really change the playbook in terms of like how all of these equities wrapper going to get included into like S&P and all of the other ETF index. Moving on to regulatory news, something that's, I would say, somewhat positive. The SEC has pretty much declared that certain stablecoins are not securities, especially if they're backed one-to-one by physical fiat or highly liquid, low-risk assets, which means that USDC and USDT are not a security. It's still to be determined if yield-bearing fiat tokens are not going to be included. Their legal status is still quite Having said that, the biggest stablecoin, Tether or USDT, seems to understand that it's going to get harder and harder for them to play in the US and EU because of tightening rules. Paolo, the CEO of Tether, has even publicly stated that the company is open to actually launching a US-specific, US-domiciled stablecoin and pretty much going to market USDT going to be for offshore emerging markets instead. So truly offshore dollar and onshore dollar playbook. And that is it pretty much for this week's Macro Monday/Tuesday. Let's hope that we don't see further Armageddon tomorrow on April 9th as Trump and China goes back and forth with their tariff discussion. Until next time, cheers.